I'm Rosanne Ullman, and welcome to the Write My Memoirs videocast, I guess I'll call it. I'm here with, I'm not here with anyone, but John Walker Pattison has written a memoir, and he's in England, I'm in Florida, and we're going to have a little talk about how you go about writing a memoir when would you call yourself an ordinary person, John?
Oh, absolutely. Very ordinary, no different than anyone else.
Okay. And yet you felt that your life was worthy of a memoir. So take me through the whole decision, how this light bulb went off in your head that I should write a book.
Yeah, I guess, and hello to everyone who's listening and watching. Um, I am very, very humbled to be today one of the longest cancer survivors in the United Kingdom. So I'm very humbled about that. I was diagnosed 50 years ago as a young, immature, naive 18-year-old boy. Um, and going through life after cancer, when I retired, I decided that my story was something that could offer hope and inspiration to anyone who'd been touched by a cancer diagnosis. Now, very importantly, I don't consider myself to be special in any way, shape, or form. I do believe strongly that every cancer patient has a story to tell. My story just happens to be a little bit different in as much that it is a three-dimensional story. It was my experience as a young, naive 18-year-old. It then became the story of my 4-year-old daughter who was diagnosed with leukemia. And I subsequently went on to become a senior cancer nurse consultant at the very hospital that made my diagnosis 50 years ago. So when I retired 2.5 years ago through chronic illness, and all of my current health problems are all related to the salubrious chemotherapy and radiotherapy that I received all those decades ago. So I decided that my story could provide hope and inspiration, and therefore I put pen to paper and started to write. I very much wanted it to be not just a chronicle that was going to be inspirational to anyone touched by a cancer diagnosis. And we know that the scary statistics, 1 in 2 of the population will get a cancer diagnosis at some point in their lives. And every one of us, I know all of your listeners will have been touched by cancer in some way, shape, or form, whether or not it's a friend, a relative, or that they themselves. So the statistics are very, very scary. So I wanted to offer inspiration, but I also wanted to be a memoir that was educational, particularly for healthcare professionals who don't always, and I say this with the greatest of respect, don't always understand the psychological burden of a cancer diagnosis. That psychological burden is absolutely immense. And I think we ignore the psychological care and management of cancer patients at our peril. It's just as important as the physical management of cancer patients. And then, thirdly, it was meant to be a catharsis for myself to try and rid some of the demons that lurked in the canyons of my mind. I have to be totally honest and say that it never actually achieved that particular goal. And I still have many, many dark moments today. Fortunately, my wife June is always around and tops up my glass on a regular basis.
But
So
did you feel that
fundamentally,
the writing, did it help at all?
um, it, it it did, and in some respects it didn't, because I was reliving those dark moments. And much of the dark moments during the many years of failed treatments left me contemplating suicide. And I say that with a brave heart. I don't apologize for that. Back in the 70s, the treatment was very, very harsh. It was a brutal form of treatment, the chemotherapy and indeed the radiotherapy. And as a naive 18-year-old, I was a very private young man. I kept myself to myself. I didn't share my innermost thoughts with, my parents in particular. And that was a wrong thing to do. I should have shared those thoughts. But it became a more difficult burden to manage and to cope with. Thankfully, I didn't have the courage or the heart to actually grasp that handshake of suicide, which clearly would have been an irreversible handshake. So reliving some of those moments and the darker moments was very, very difficult. And I guess the hardest part of writing that memoir was reliving the diagnosis of my 4-year-old daughter, Donna.
Sure.
And not just her diagnosis, but obviously her treatment as well.
But do you feel that, I mean, you're there anyway, in a way, it's all in your mind, it's all, maybe it's farther back, and that writing it frees you a little bit? In your book, you say that it was cathartic, so that's why I'm kind of
Yeah. I think, and some people may find this difficult to understand, but had it not been for my cancer diagnosis, I wouldn't be the person that I am today. That's probably a difficult concept for some people to understand, but I firmly believe, and I say again this with the greatest respect to anyone who's undergoing treatment or has recently been diagnosed with a cancer diagnosis. For me, the cancer experience has made me a better person.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so I also had cancer. I had breast cancer in 1992, and so I would think the methodologies improved, the treatments improved, plus breast cancer, they had a lot of information about.
Yeah.
But I agree, it was horrible. The diagnosis was horrible. I went through treatment. I lost my hair. I did all that. And yet, like, as you say, I wouldn't be the same person.
Yeah.
Otherwise.
I think certainly throughout my nursing career, speaking with cancer patients, if I was seeing someone with a recent diagnosis or even someone who was on treatment, then just about 99% of people would say that it gives them a full appreciation of life.
Yes, well, and you really changed you because it guided your career path.
Yeah, that's right.
That really changed you. All right, so I want to, so I pulled up the cover, Me and My Shadow, Memoirs of a Cancer Survivor by John Walker Pattison. Tell me how you decided. A lot of authors want to know how to make the cover, or even what to call it, deciding on a title, a cover, everything from the font to the photo, and you have yourself with your hands over your eyes, and then you have a shadow, and you call it Me and My Shadow. So take me through that process.
Okay, so originally the idea was going to be 3 photographs of myself. The first one with my hands covering my eyes, so I'm really just hiding from the diagnosis. The second one was me with my hands opening, so I'm starting to accept the diagnosis. And then the final one was me with no hands across my face and a large smile on my face. So it was obviously, the end of treatment and remission. The publishers decided that there was too many photographs, so we just went with this one because it kind of fit in with the title, Me and My Shadow. And that's exactly what a cancer diagnosis is for me. It's that shadow. It's a permanent shadow, not just because of the current health problems that I have, as I say, as a consequence of the treatment, but also a new cancer that I'm dealing with at the present time. So I think until the day I die, cancer will always be my permanent shadow.
Okay, I relate to that to a degree. I mean, I think every cancer, I don't call myself a survivor, but everyone who's had cancer will relate to that to a degree. My story is a little different. I think it was less dramatic. Why green?
Green is the color of health, apparently. So that was the easy choice.
Oh, interesting. Even the dark green like that. It's pretty.
Yeah.
Okay, so how long ago did you set down to do this and how long did it take?
It only took me around about 6 months to write from my perspective. And I would regularly wake up in the middle of the night and remember different aspects of my pathway, my journey. So I would get up in the middle of the night, much to my wife's disgust, and make notes and then type them up the following day. However, at the time of just before I retired, I did manage to convince the healthcare establishment in England to let me see my medical records. That was important because I wanted to get the chronological order of the treatments that I received correct.
In England, is that hard to do, to see your own records?
You're allowed to do that. The medical establishment, they will charge you for doing it. It's not free, and they have the right or the ability to redact certain aspects of it. They didn't redact any of my notes, to be honest.
Okay.
But I assure you, I guess is it not the same in America?
Well, I'm not sure. I think we all feel that we have access to our records.
Yeah.
A lot of it's online.
Right, right. So
I can't see. I don't think
yeah,
you
I
can
mean,
see
some of
X-rays.
our records are online, but that would be your current medication, what vaccinations you'd had, or letters to and from consultants. I'm talking about my actual medical
I think you have the
records.
right to pick up a file and take it to a different doctor for one thing. But okay,
Right. Okay.
I'm not an expert on
Yeah, you wouldn't
any.
have that ability in the UK.
And then okay, so it took you 6 months of how many hours a day would you say? Or a
Gosh,
week?
it varied a great deal. As I say, sometimes it would be the middle of the night when I would recall something. And can I just add, Roseanne, that there are some humorous sides to the story as well.
Okay.
I didn't want it to be completely dark and depressive, so there are some humorous sides in there as well.
I think that's important though, and memoir writers who will write about a serious topic like yours, which is this is typically the reason non-famous people write a memoir is this reason, to help other people with the same challenge that they just feel that they triumphed over, or at least came out of in one piece. Sometimes it's abuse, sometimes it's living under an abusive government, or under oppression. But the health journey is a pretty good common
Yeah,
story. Not that any one person's story is like
and I think
another's.
writing the memoir is a therapeutic process in itself.
Well, right, that's what I was asking you, how therapeutic is it? And a lot of people feel that they almost can't move on until they just put their story down. For one thing, you want to be the one to tell your story. Sometimes you hear other people talking about whatever it was you went through, and so you just want to be the one to tell it. And especially you have your story, so you have a lot of themes going on, and yet they interrelate. People ask about that a lot too, like a memoir isn't an autobiography. You don't take yourself from birth to death. You may mention some of that, or birth to present, I guess. It's not like a biography or an autobiography. Even a memoir focuses on a theme, and you have a couple themes running, but they do intersect.
Yes.
Because you had cancer, your daughter had cancer, so you go through her health journey as well, but it is a similar scary diagnosis.
Yes.
And then you also had a spiritual connection to it. A lot of people want to share their spirituality. Yours, I feel, is different than most people's who write a memoir and want to talk about the spiritual aspect of their triumph over their challenge.
Yeah.
So talk a little about why you decided to put that in and what it was about. I'm going to take Me and My Shadow down, and I hope everybody who wants to see it has noted the name.
Yeah, the spirituality aspect was extremely important, and it relates to the Lakota Sioux Empire or the Lakota Sioux Nation. As a young boy in England, I was always fascinated by Native American Indians. And when I was poorly at the age of 18, my Auntie Mary, who still does live in North Carolina, my mum's sister, clearly my mum was writing back and forwards to her and was telling her or giving her updates with regards to my illness. My mum had innocently told my Auntie Mary about my interest in Native American Indians, and I came back from hospital one day having had some treatment, and there was a large parcel there for me. And when I opened it up, there was a lot of Indian memorabilia in there from Ukonalifty village in the Great Smoky Mountains of North
Wow.
Carolina. Um, so there was authentic beads, headbands, there was all kinds of stuff. But most importantly, there was a book in there, and I know for a fact that many of your listeners will have read Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee by D. Brown. And I started to flick through the pages. I personally, despite currently being an author, I've never been an avid or a great reader. But when I picked up Bury My Heart, I just started to read and read and read. And obviously, it's about the oppression and how the Native Americans were maligned over the many decades and hundreds of years. But it was particularly the Lakota Sioux that I could identify with. And I just picked up the spirituality, these proud people. And I promised myself that if I was fortunate enough to survive this cancer diagnosis, then one day I would visit Wounded Knee in South Dakota. My wife and I have been to Wounded Knee on many, many occasions, and it's always a very spiritual experience wandering around that graveyard, looking at and recognizing the gravestones of some of these ancient warriors who I'd read about. So they were my inspiration during my difficult years. And in 2018, I wrote to the Tribal Council of Pine Ridge Indian Reservation and explained about my history, and they invited me onto the reservation. So I spent a week on Pine Ridge Indian Reservation with the Indigenous people who had unknowingly supported me through life's greatest challenge, my cancer diagnosis. And again, that was a very humbling experience. And at the end of that week, they asked me to attend the tribal council. I was presented with a star quilt, which is reserved for honoured guests. And I was also made, excuse me, I was made an honorary member of the tribal council. So that was very, very emotional to be given that honour.
And so it helped you get through your diagnosis, through your whole ordeal, and
Absolutely.
that's why you could, weave it into your memoir, and it
Yes.
all made sense. All right, so you get to you finish your memoir, and what happens? Do you give it to a friend? Do you give it to an editor? Do you give it to your wife? Who all reads it?
Oh, friends, family, and obviously then there is and you've got to be brutally honest, and you've got to tell people that you want to know where the errors are. You want to know what's not working, what doesn't flow. So there is edit after edit, and after that time, then you can then start sending out in the hope that you can get a publisher.
Okay, so you hit a point where you felt it was ready. Can you guess how many edits you went through?
Oh gosh, many.
Many, okay.
I don't recall exactly how many, but there were many, yes.
And did you find some people had suggestions that you just didn't agree with?
I think that's always going to be the case, but I think you've got to be fairly focused. If you're going to write a book and you're going to ask for opinions, then you've got to take on the negative opinions as well. And just because I disagreed with that doesn't necessarily mean that my viewpoint was the correct one. So I did make a number of changes on the viewpoints of other people.
Oh, so you trusted that. Okay, maybe if you heard it more than once from different people.
That's right. Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay, so back to the writing process. Did you do everything in order, like the way you wrote, is that the order of the book, or did you end up, did you start in the middle? Did you write the ending before you had completely finished the book? Is there any deviation from how the book reads
Yeah, that's a
now?
great question. I'm not sure how other traditional authors would start the writing process, but for me, it was very, I guess the way to describe it would be mishmash.
Oh,
I
okay.
did start at the very beginning, at the age of 18, sitting and recalling the time that I was told of my diagnosis. But from there, once I started to write, it kind of just jumped all over the place. And I remembered what happened at the end of treatment. Remembered what happened with Donna. Then, of course, there was a little bit about
Anna
my,
is your daughter, just want to clarify.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, so when you had these thoughts running through your mind, and you thought you had a pretty crystallized, you sat down and wrote it. You didn't say, well, I'm not there yet. Here, I'll make a few notes, but you sat down and wrote it while you had it fresh in your head. Yeah.
Yeah, so I would sit down and I would always write longhand.
Oh, you're
So
kidding. Okay.
no, I would always write longhand,
All
yeah,
right.
and that would allow me to read over it, certainly a couple of times, and then make changes again longhand before I would then type it up onto the computer itself. And I think what I would do is I would have chapter A, chapter B rather than numbers, just so that when I did come to process it all together, I could then put it into some semblance of order. So initially, there were just a whole bunch of different chapters, not necessarily in chronological order.
Okay. And then maybe I would guess you might have combined a couple because they came at the same time.
Yeah, yeah. So
Um,
many of the chapters would have to have parts of them rewritten. Some of the parts of the chapters would be moved to other chapters. It probably sounds a very, very confusing process. Um,
right.
I
Which
am a little bit of a messy worker.
I think most writers do something like that. It's mostly the beginning. What we coaches will tell a writer is, if you want to write a memoir and you don't know how to begin, don't worry about the beginning. The beginning can come later. Write a story from your life you want to tell, and it's vivid in your mind, and you think you can make it come alive for readers, because a memoir is really a series of stories, unlike an autobiography, which is maybe a little more essay-like. Um, and I think that's probably, from what you're saying, it's probably good advice. It gets you writing, it gets you comfortable with sitting and doing it. You do it longhand, and I'd probably be surprised that more people do than I think, but I certainly don't.
Yeah, I think that no, I think that's very important, because once you start to write and it flows, then you don't want to stop. You just want to keep on going and
Yeah,
get it down on paper.
yeah, that makes sense. Did you have research to do other than getting your own medical records? Were there things about maybe the Lakota Sioux that you didn't know, or something you wanted to include? I mean, I find a lot of times there's research. People will write about the city they grew up in. They don't really know anything about it anymore. They were there for 3 years or so, or 10 years, and that
I've
kind of
lived
thing.
I've lived all my life in South Shields, which is a small seaside town which nestles on the northeast coast of England. So I know my hometown. I don't want to sound as though I'm being blasé, but having read "Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee" dozens and dozens of times, and many other chronicles, historical, factual books on the Lakota Sioux, and indeed more recently in the last, certainly the last 5 6 years, I travel around the northeast of England and I give talks about Pine Ridge Indian Reservation,
Oh,
talking
wow.
a little
Okay.
bit about the history of the Sioux,
You've
and
already
then
done that
what
work.
it's like on a reservation today.
And other
So
medical things, like other things about cancer?
again, I didn't need to research that simply because I was a senior cancer nurse consultant. So I had been doing the job, and clearly I would be reading clinical papers on a regular basis anyway.
Yeah, that does make sense in your case. Did it matter where you were? Did you always have to be at a desk, I mean, did you have to be home? If you were away, could you still do it? Right.
Yeah, I'd always have a notepad with me, and very often at the most inopportune times, I would think, oh yes, I must write this down. But I would have a notepad with me all of the time and scribble notes. There would be many times when I got back home and I'd look and say, "What on earth have you written here?" And I have to sit and study and try and decipher what I'd written down.
And but did you feel during those 6 months that you were kind of two different people? You were you younger and you today, and like you were just sort of living in this 1970s, 80s, 90s world at the same time you were trying to carry on your regular life?
Yeah, I guess I did, and to be honest, I never really thought about it like that, but I think yeah, I probably did. I was fixated in that era, particularly with my own journey in the early 70s. So yes, that was a fixation that I did have.
Okay, so now let's jump ahead, and you're finished with your last edit and you would like to publish it.
Yeah,
All right.
easier said than done, as everyone knows.
Yeah,
So the process was really just then doing some hard research to find a publisher who publishes memoirs. And again, as everyone will be aware, more refusals than not. And I think that's purely and simply because I am just John Walker Pattison. I think it's so easy for musicians, actors to say I'm going to do a memoir,
sure.
and of course it's
Oh yeah, they get in advance because it doesn't matter.
yeah,
The publishing companies have editors who will work on it, or, co-writers or whatever you need,
yeah,
because they know you have an interesting story to tell, because if you're famous, they know your
that's right.
story.
Yeah,
Not so much for all of the rest of us.
yeah. So I eventually found a hybrid publisher, which proved to be extremely frustrating, purely and simply on the proofreading aspect of things. It would come back, I guess it must have come back or gone back and forward over a dozen times, easily over a dozen times. And when it would come back to me, despite me, by my own admission, not being the most grammatically accurate person in the world, I could still see clearly there were errors in the manuscript. So that, from that perspective, it was very frustrating.
Yeah, well, because it was a hybrid publisher, that
Yeah,
probably doesn't happen as much.
yeah.
So then you're faced with kind of trusting yourself, or maybe you have a friend who, has an English degree or something like that.
Exactly. Yes, actually, my sister-in-law, and it wasn't until I was starting to get frustrated with the publishing process, that I just completely by chance happened to mention to Diane, and she said I'd be more than happy to look at it. So Diane took a look at it and made lots and lots of changes for me, and that was actually the final edit.
So you had your final edit after you found a publisher. And
Yeah,
is this a publisher that, you can name the publisher if you like.
yeah. It's Austin McCoy.
Okay, and do they accept everyone, or do they still have I don't want to I don't want to say, oh, they had no standards, but
No, I know.
just for
Yeah,
everybody out there, if they want to get their work published no matter what, and they don't want to fully self-publish,
yeah.
then can they find a company like that will probably say yes? Or
I guess
was it
I
still
guess so.
competitive?
Although yeah, I do know one or two people who did have refusals from
Okay.
Austin McCoy. So I don't think they just carte blanche accept every manuscript they receive.
That's what it sounds like. I really don't know. I don't know a lot about the publishing process, as much as people ask me at Write My Memoirs, because we will help people self-publish also.
Right.
I don't even think it's a hybrid, because we just publish whatever you send us.
Yeah.
Um, but that's funny that I think the British have such nice words for things. We don't call them refusals, we call them rejections.
Oh.
It's a little harsh. So you kind of, so you went to that route first, the
Mhm.
publisher, yeah, and then you found the hybrid. And when was the publishing date? How long ago?
It was October 2022.
2022. Okay,
Um,
so you're
and
2 years into this now. I didn't.
yeah, and I've just actually, interestingly, I've just negotiated with Austin Macaulay to add another chapter.
Oh,
So I'm currently adding another chapter, and I'm hopeful that that's going to be the second edition will be out probably about March, April time next year.
what are you adding?
I'm adding some additional health problems, a new cancer that I developed since it was originally published. I'm also going to add some health advice as well, particularly dietary advice, supplementation, that kind of thing.
Okay, so that's interesting. So you can go back to these publishers and say, I'd like to update, other things happened. It's been 2 years or it's been 5 years. So that is interesting also. Now, you say you do some touring to talk about the Lakota Sioux, Native Americans. Do you also go to book signings and that kind
I
of?
do, yes. So I do also do inspirational talks about my, not just the book, but obviously about my life story. Yeah, so anyone who wants to listen, I'll go along and talk.
Go and
Whether
do
it
that?
be, it may well be a group of only half a dozen people, but only 2 weeks ago I spoke to a group of 420 people. So groups large and small, I don't mind. I'm
Okay,
happy.
so 20 people come, how many buy the book?
I don't tend to take books with me. I know that's probably an
Oh,
alien concept, but I don't want to go along and have people feel as though they have to buy books. I would much rather go along, talk about my experience and the book, and give them information at the end of the talk, and then it's entirely up to them whether or not they go ahead and buy a book at their
that's
own
generous of you.
volition.
Um, I think you'd be surprised. People will walk out and not buy a book. I think you should take your books with you.
Okay.
That's my advice. Because if they're excited, that's when they're going to buy it. They
Yeah.
go home, they're making dinner, they forget about it. And it's on Amazon.
It is, yes. It's available worldwide, but I think these days most people do use Amazon, not just for the fact that the products are discounted, but it's also very, very quick. I know in the UK you can get next day delivery.
Correct. Sometimes you can get same day delivery.
Oh, right,
I
wow.
don't know about the book, but in some things it's kind of, yeah, you order in the morning and there it is. And I don't think this happens with a lot of authors, but you were retired, and so this turned you into a more regular author, correct? Oh, now you're a
It,
writer.
that's right, yeah. So I have always been described, particularly by my wife, as an elasticated grandpa. So, for example, the time I climbed up Mount Everest barefoot and captured the abominable snowman,
That's
or
a
the
book in
time I
itself.
captured, sorry,
That's a book.
yeah, or the time I saved the King of England from some would-be robbers who were trying to steal the crown jewels. I've captured the Loch Ness monster. I've run faster than the Japanese
Okay. So
bullet
this is
train.
all fantasy life.
Yeah, all these exaggerated stories. So I've now written 3 children's books. The most recent one, which is set in Arizona, the fastest water pistol in Splodge City. And that's a story of Daniel, my grandson, and myself, whom he calls Papa. And we go up to Splodge City to try and prevent them causing havoc. So the main culprit, the main villain, is a dastardly villain called Wild Will Hickory Dickory Jock. And there are other characters such as Ricky Smarty Farty Pants and a whole host of others. But
which is harder? Which is harder, writing a children's book or writing a memoir?
Writing a memoir.
Yeah,
No problems at
and
all.
we have that in common too. In fact, mine's behind me there. I wrote The Case of the Disappearing Kisses, also based on kind of a real life, my daughter and her, there's my book.
Right.
my daughter when she was little, and she had a funny thing that I wrote up as a children's book.
Right,
So
good.
I guess
So
if you like to write, you like to write.
yeah, and I think my children's books are just pure escapism. You know, a little bit of magic that each of the books, and incidentally, every one of my children's books includes a Native American. Very importantly,
Who does the illustration?
I have a friend who's a very good illustrator, so he does them for me.
And then did you go the same way? Did you just use the publisher you were already using, or how did you
I
proceed?
did for the first two, and then the third one, I have gone with another hybrid, but a different publisher. And then next year, I have a book coming out called Kingdom of Huckleberry Jam, and that is now with a traditional publisher. So eventually, a traditional publisher has picked up my work. So
That is so encouraging. I'd love to follow up and see the different experience you have once that's published.
sure.
And because people ask that too, like they don't know what to expect with a hybrid versus a traditional publisher versus self-publishing. You might find it similar, you might find it very different, but that's really encouraging because it seems like when people write up how they got their bestseller going, seems like they've written like thousands of books, that they've written. I'm exaggerating, but a lot of books sent out to a lot of agents, and finally some agent believes in them enough to stick with them, and on their, I don't know, 12th book or something, they finally find a publisher. And to somebody who's writing a memoir who thinks this might be one and done, that's a really discouraging story. So even though you're still, I feel like being on your fourth children's book is still a little more encouraging because obviously they've been reading, they read what you had and they thought that they could, you had some good stories, some good imagination, and they trusted you to write another book. So I think that's really encouraging for
Well, in all honesty, there is another 3 manuscripts after the Kingdom of Huckleberry Jam finished.
So you're prolific.
Yeah,
And you're
well,
fast, it seems.
yeah, I've got Luna von Beulah, the mystical mouse from Missoula.
Okay.
So that'll be later next year.
Missoula, Montana.
Yes.
That's the area of our country here that you like the best.
We absolutely adore Montana, and my wife and I have visited Livingston, Montana. Got 2 very good friends there in Montana, and it's absolutely beautiful place. It really
Well,
is.
you'll have to come here to Florida. I thank you so much for being with me here today on Write My Memoirs, and I'll ask you to stick around while I.
Sure. Well, the pleasure's been all mine.
I'm sorry.
The pleasure has been all mine.
Thank you. And again, it's when you state the name of your book, state your name.
So it's John Walker Pattison, Me and My Shadow, Memoirs of a Cancer Survivor.
Very good. I will reach out to other authors if you'd like to be interviewed the way John has.
Sure.
Get in touch with me, Rosanne at writemymemoirs.com, or that's good. Or find me on anywhere, on Instagram, on Facebook, you can find me.
Could I just finally say, Rosanne, that if anyone does read my book, then take from it what you can, hopefully inspiration. But if you feel necessary, criticize it where it's appropriate, because it's not a prescriptive guide as to how people deal with cancer, because no such prescription exists.
Okay, that's good. And if they'd like to leave a review, you'd welcome that, right?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Amazon reviews, everyone knows. It doesn't sound like your goal was to sell 1 million books. Your goal was to just put your story out there, and I think a lot of people feel
it was. But I guess if I did sell 1 million books, then it's getting the message out there, and it's inspiring people, which is fundamentally what I really want to do.
Absolutely. Well, I'll ask this. I know I already said goodbye, but I'll still ask this. How do you decide what to price your book at?
I didn't. The publisher did that.
Publisher did that. And do you have a hardback, a paperback, and an audiobook?
Yeah, all 3.
So did you do your own audiobook?
Sorry, no, I don't have an audiobook. I've got a hardback, a paperback, and a Kindle edition.
Oh, the Kindle edition. Okay, so you haven't narrated it for an audio.
No, no.
Okay. But those are, yeah, okay, so I don't know how that works either, so, if you wanted to, I suppose you could, but I think that's a whole big.
Yeah. I guess I might consider that when the second edition comes out next year.
Yeah, I think it's not maybe as important as the children's book, because you want them to look at the pictures.
Yeah.
Did you include any photos in your book?
No, I didn't, no.
Memoir? No. A lot of people want to, and a lot of memoirs have photos, so that's really up to the author. Okay, again, thank you.